It was one of those dinners that feels scripted until something breaks the rhythm. Her friends were already a few glasses in, loud, glowing with wine-warm confidence, and I was mostly quiet, the way you get when you know the night isn't really about you. I was content watching, playing the role of the supportive husband who knows not to insert too much of himself into her social scenes, until she said it. Men always expect too much: attention, loyalty, gratitude. She didn't even look at me. She said it to the table, tossed out between bites of tuna tartare and stories about difficult clients and overpriced yoga classes. The women laughed, nodded. One of them added, "Right, like they think we exist to orbit them." More laughter. I smiled, but it wasn't real. Just enough to avoid questions. She glanced at me then, briefly, like she was checking to see if I was in on the joke or about to ruin the mood. I lifted my glass, held her gaze just long enough to let her wonder, then turned back to the conversation across from me. She didn't push it. She never did when she sensed I was filing something away. Because that's what I did. I filed it away. I didn't respond, didn't confront. That would have made it too easy for her to dismiss it as a joke, the way people always do when truth leaks out in careless sentences. Instead, I just kept it. Like a tiny crack in drywall. You ignore it at first, then you start noticing how it spreads. Later that night, she leaned into me on the couch. Her body was warm from wine and laughter, but I felt cold. Her hand rested on my thigh. She said something about how nice it was to see everyone again. I nodded. "You okay?" she asked, her voice still loose and light. "Yeah," I said, keeping my eyes on the muted TV screen. "Just tired." She accepted that. Too easily. And that was the moment I knew something had shifted, not in her, but in me. The man who used to hold on tight had started to loosen his grip, not out of anger, out of clarity. She said men expect too much. So I decided, right then, to expect nothing. And when you expect nothing, you start watching everything. I didn't pull away all at once. That would have made her suspicious, and suspicion invites performance. No, I made it quiet enough that even she didn't notice, at least not at first. The next morning, she started one of her routines. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms folded, that slight pout on her lips. "You didn't take the trash out again." Normally I would have apologized, kissed her temple, and taken care of it. That was the script. Predictable, smooth, safe. Instead, I just looked up from my coffee and said, "You're right." No tone. No argument. No apology. Then I went back to reading. She waited for something more, some emotional bridge to cross, but I offered nothing. Silence filled the space where my energy used to live. She walked away without another word. That's how it began. I stopped asking how her day was unless she brought it up. I didn't plan Friday night reservations or leave notes in her laptop bag like I used to. I didn't book the wine-tasting trip she'd been hinting at since February. When she asked about it, I just shrugged. Didn't think it mattered. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me across the room, like she was trying to measure the temperature of something that used to be warm but had cooled without her noticing. She wasn't sure why it felt different yet. She thought maybe it was work stress, or the changing seasons, or just a phase. But I knew. It was the slow erosion of effort. When she'd vent about her coworkers or her sister or some vague frustration she didn't name, I used to be fully present, validating, listening, offering gentle advice even when she wasn't really looking for it. Now I listened just enough to nod. I didn't reach for her hand, didn't tell her she was right. I just let her words fall between us like coins down a well. And she started feeling it. One night, she came into the living room wearing that familiar oversized sweater she knew I liked. She curled up beside me on the couch, leaned her head on my shoulder. "You're quiet lately," she said softly, not accusing, more like probing. I didn't move. "I'm just giving you what you said men shouldn't expect." She stiffened slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled, slow and tired. "Nothing. Forget it." She didn't forget it, but she let it go. For now. The thing about giving less is that it makes you realize how much you gave before, how much of yourself you poured into someone who never once asked if your cup was running dry. And once you stop pouring, the silence says more than words ever could. It took her a few weeks to notice something was really off. Not just a bad day or two, an actual shift. A gap in the rhythm. A missing heartbeat in the routine we used to call love. She caught me standing at the kitchen counter one evening, eating dinner straight from the pan. I hadn't set the table. I hadn't waited. That used to be our ritual, even on tired nights. She walked in, dropped her bag, and stared. You didn't wait? I didn't look up. Didn't think you'd be home early. She walked over, set her phone down with more force than necessary. You're being distant. I gave a soft shrug. I'm just giving less. Her brows pulled in. Less? I turned to her then, kept my voice even. You said men expect too much. I took it seriously. She blinked, the words landing harder than she expected. That was a joke, but I wasn't smiling. Sure. She crossed her arms. So now what? You're punishing me. I shook my head. I'm just adjusting expectations. Yours. And mine. The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable kind. It was weighted, uneasy. She didn't know how to fight that kind of calm. There was nothing loud to push against. After that, she got louder. Not with volume, but with behavior. She started dropping passive remarks. You don't ask me about my day anymore. You used to bring me coffee in the mornings. Are you ever going to plan something fun again? Each one a test, baiting me to reassure her. I didn't bite. One night, I found her scrolling photos from our old trips, her legs tucked under her on the couch, a blanket draped over her lap. She looked over, searching for a crack in my distance. Remember this? She asked, tilting her phone toward me. I glanced, yeah, and returned to my screen. She stared at me for a long time after that, like I'd just walked out of the frame and taken something she hadn't realized she needed until it was gone. But she didn't stop taking. She kept expecting the version of me she'd grown used to, the one who carried the emotional weight, who softened when she hardened. She didn't realize she was now leaning on a wall that had quietly stepped back. I slept lighter those nights, listening to her breathing shift in the dark. Her back stayed turned longer. Her phone lit up more often. She thought I was drifting, but I wasn't drifting. I was measuring how much she noticed, and how little she cared, until she started losing control. She was never good at subtle, not really. She thought she was, thought that silence and half-truths counted as mystery instead of misdirection. But I noticed, I always noticed, it started with the phone. Not a new device, just a new relationship with it. She started keeping it face down more often. Used to be, she'd leave it on the nightstand or the kitchen counter, unattended, charging, forgotten. Now, it was always with her. Bathroom, bedroom, even during dinner. Her thumb moved faster, her eyes stayed locked in, and when I walked into the room, the screen went black too quickly. One night I heard her laugh, low, almost private, as she texted in bed beside me. I turned slightly, enough to see the glow on her face but not enough to make her feel watched. Who's that? I asked casually. She didn't look up. Oh, just Eric, from work. Eric, a new name. She said it like I should already know it, like he'd been in the background for years instead of days. I gave a slight nod. Cool. That was it. No interrogation. No accusations. Just an acknowledgement I hoped she'd misinterpret as trust. She smiled slightly, relieved maybe. But my mind didn't rest. The next day, I remembered something. Our calendars were still synced from back when we thought being organized together made us stronger. I opened mine on my laptop during lunch, pretending to work. Her name lit up with a series of back-to-back events. Strategy check-in, client development, team debrief, all suddenly repeating with new frequency. One stood out. Off-site meeting, 7 p.m., Lakeside. I hovered my mouse over it. Friday night. Supposed to be our date night, if we were still pretending those mattered. When she got home that evening, she kissed me on the cheek and breezed past. Work late tomorrow, she said. Off-site meeting with Eric. Her tone was light, like it was nothing. But her voice had that shift, higher, slightly rehearsed. I'd heard it before, the way someone speaks when they've practiced the sentence just enough to sound natural. I nodded. Hope it's productive. She smiled, a little too long, then vanished into the bedroom. That night, while she showered, I sat on the floor in our hallway, scrolling through her cloud backups on an old iPad she'd forgotten about. Most of it was dull, work docs, screenshots, Pinterest boards. But one album was new, unlabeled, filled with filtered selfies, some sent, some saved. And one, just one, had a blurred reflection behind her in a hotel mirror. Not quite touching her. Not quite invisible either. I took a screenshot. Then I turned off the iPad, placed it gently back in the drawer, and returned to bed before she came out of the bathroom. She slipped in beside me, humming softly, her hair damp against the pillow. We should go hiking this weekend, she murmured. I wrapped an arm around her, just like always. Yeah, I said. That sounds nice. She smiled in the dark, and I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, already planning my next step. I didn't confront her. That would have made it about emotion, and emotion clouds judgment. What I needed was clarity, distance, data. So I watched. Not in the dramatic, shadow-lurking sense. I watched the way you watch when you already know the answer but need confirmation for your own peace. I started syncing her online calendars to mine again, silently, without a word. I checked the shared drive we'd long forgotten about, where she used to store presentation slides and travel itineraries. She still used it, sloppily. One folder was labeled Q3 Events. Inside were PDFs of client dinners, hotel bookings, and car reservations. One of the bookings, Friday night at the Lakeside Hotel, had her name and Eric's. 2 rooms, same floor. I checked the timestamp. Reserved 2 weeks ago. So much for spontaneity. Still, I said nothing. She needed to believe she still had control. That was the only way to see how deep the lie went. I started backing up everything. I archived what I found: messages, photo details, and travel bookings. I checked our shared expenses. She created a new Venmo alias. Payments labeled with things like shared Uber, dinner split, client lunch. The emojis she used said more than the words. There was one payment that stood out. Late at night, $150, with a heart. She labeled it. Thanks for everything. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but it didn't matter. I wasn't trying to catch her red-handed. I was building a timeline, a structure. I mirrored her device quietly while she was upstairs. Quietly, carefully. She'd left it charging in the kitchen one night, while she was folding laundry upstairs. It took 15 minutes with a lightning adapter and the right software. I encrypted the files, uploaded them to a hidden drive, and erased the trail. From that point on, every text she sent, every photo she saved, every appointment she entered, I saw it all. Not in real time, but close enough. And what I saw wasn't physical, not yet. It was worse. It was emotional. She texted Eric late at night. Long messages about feeling unseen. About how things at home are weird. About how she missed being around someone who just gets it. He was clever. Polite. Just enough boundaries to pretend he wasn't waiting to cross them. One message hit harder than the rest. She'd written, "He doesn't even argue anymore. It's like he's already gone." She was right. I had gone. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally, strategically. And still, I said nothing. Not yet. Let her feel safe. Let her think she's balancing both worlds without consequence. Because when someone believes they're safe, they start getting sloppy. They overplay. They stop hiding. And that's when the real damage reveals itself. Not in the act, but in the justification they build around it. It wasn't the messages themselves that broke the illusion. It was the way she rewrote our story to justify hers. That's what finally made it real. One afternoon, while she was out running errands, I sat at my desk with her mirrored phone data open in front of me. The newest thread with Eric was long. Too long. Full of those half-confessions people share when they're looking to be absolved without ever being honest. And there it was, one line that settled everything. "He's just not who I thought he'd be long-term. He's so passive now. I do everything and he just fades." Passive. That word stuck. It wasn't just an insult. It was a rewrite of the man she'd once said made her feel anchored. Now she was casting me as the anchor holding her back. The conversation spiraled from there. She told him about how disconnected she felt, how she missed being with someone who made her feel seen. He offered soft encouragement, exactly the way she needed it. Little phrases like, "You deserve more," and "Don't settle for being tolerated." She replied with a photo. Just her smile. Nothing explicit. But the way she sent it, the timing, the softness in her eyes, it wasn't a casual selfie. It was an offering. I sat there, hands still, breathing steady. I wasn't surprised. By that point, I had stopped expecting truth. What caught me off guard was the relief I felt. I didn't want her back. Not anymore. Something in me had detached fully. The moment I saw her speak about me in past tense, like I was already a burden she was preparing to mourn, something broke free. The sadness was still there, sure. But the need? Gone. She came home that evening like nothing had shifted. Set down her bag, called out that she was picking up dinner tomorrow, maybe sushi. I nodded. She crossed the room, kissed me on the temple. Long day? She asked. I looked up, held her gaze just long enough. Yeah. Eye-opening. She smiled like she didn't hear the weight in my tone. Well, tomorrow will be better. She had no idea I'd already packed a travel bag with essentials and moved copies of every financial document into a private folder. No idea I'd opened a new bank account in my name only. No idea I'd talked to a legal advisor that morning under the guise of reviewing contracts. She thought I was just fading. But I wasn't fading. I was preparing. She wanted less effort from me. She wanted space, freedom, gratitude for crumbs. Now she'd get exactly what she asked for. And none of it would feel the way she expected. I stopped entirely. No more effort. No more pretending. No more anchoring conversations or softening tension. I wasn't cold. I wasn't cruel. I was simply done contributing to a performance where I was the only one still rehearsing lines. She noticed quickly. It started small. She asked if I wanted to go hiking that weekend, the same trip she used to ignore when I planned it months ago. I told her to go if she wanted. No sarcasm. No hidden meaning. Just flat neutrality. The next morning, she lingered by the door with her keys in hand. You sure you don't want to come? I shook my head without looking up from my coffee. Not this time. She stood there a second too long, like she was waiting for something else. I didn't offer it. The text to Eric changed after that. She started venting about me less and asking about him more. She was feeling the vacuum. And unlike me, she wasn't built for silence. She needed attention the way a fire needs oxygen. Without it, she flickered. Then she flared. One night, she came home to a spotless house and dinner on the stove, leftovers I'd reheated for myself. I was already eating when she walked in. You made dinner? No, I said calmly. I made mine. She stood there, eyes narrowing just slightly. Okay, is this about something? No, I said, still chewing. It's about nothing. That answer rattled her more than yelling ever could. She started trying to pull me back after that. Asked if I wanted to rewatch a show we used to binge together. I told her I'd already started something new. Suggested we go out to our favorite spot. I told her I had plans. She didn't ask with softness anymore. She asked with calculation, like a manager checking a schedule. The pivot was fast. One night, she said, "You've changed." We were folding laundry, that quiet chore where old couples pretend everything is fine. I met her eyes across the couch. No, I said. I just stopped expecting. She blinked, caught off guard. Expecting what? Anything, I said simply. There was nothing loud in the moment. No fight. No slammed doors. Just her sitting there, holding one of my shirts like it had suddenly become unfamiliar. I didn't tell her about Eric. Not yet. I didn't need to. She was starting to feel the absence of the man she'd spent months diminishing. And now that he was gone, she had no idea what to do with the empty space he used to fill. She thought I was punishing her. But I wasn't. I was just following her advice. Giving less. And watching what she did when there was nothing left to take. She booked the dinner 2 weeks out and called it a little reconnect. I agreed without hesitation. Not because I cared to reconnect, but because I wanted to watch her try. She picked the place we used to go when things were good. Back when laughter wasn't measured, and touch didn't feel like negotiation. It was the kind of place with dim lights, overpriced wine, and a staff that remembered names. I hadn't been back in over a year. I arrived on time. She was already seated, hair done the way I used to love it, wearing that dress she hadn't touched in months. I nodded as I sat down. She smiled like she hadn't been drowning in distance for weeks. You look good, she said. Thanks, I replied without returning the compliment. We ordered. She spoke about work, her voice light, a little too rehearsed. I listened, nodded. Gave short answers when she turned it on me. How's your week been? She asked at one point. Quiet, I said. Focused. She smiled like she was waiting for the warmth that never came. That's good. I've been thinking a lot lately, about us. I took a sip of my drink and met her eyes. Yeah? She nodded, hesitated. I feel like we lost track of things. Like maybe we both got comfortable. I kept my tone neutral. You said men expect too much. Her smile faltered. That again? I told you that was a joke. I looked down, folded my napkin in slow, methodical lines. It wasn't a joke to me. She went quiet then. Long enough for the waiter to return. Long enough for the wine to breathe and lose its chill. I'm trying, you know, she finally said, a little sharper now. I'm here. I'm making the effort. I didn't argue, didn't affirm. Just looked at her and said calmly, I stopped expecting. She blinked, visibly taken aback. What does that even mean? It means I stopped setting myself up to be disappointed. I took you at your word, and I've been adjusting ever since. She stared, like I'd stood up and walked away mid-meal. But I was still there. I just wasn't participating in the performance anymore. Her voice softened. I didn't mean to hurt you. I nodded once. You just didn't think I'd stop noticing. The silence between us felt heavier than the food. She picked at her plate but barely ate. She looked around the restaurant a few times, maybe for comfort, maybe just to escape the intensity in my stillness. She had planned this night to get something back, but she didn't know what she'd lost until she saw I wasn't trying to retrieve it either. After dessert, she reached across the table. Her fingers brushed mine, hesitant. Can we reset? I didn't move my hand, just watched her, and said evenly, You can. I already did. She didn't speak after that. Not on the walk to the car. Not on the ride home. Because for the first time, she felt what I'd been feeling for months, absence. Not of her presence, but of mine. And now she knew what it cost. I chose a Tuesday night. Nothing dramatic, no special date. Just a regular evening when routines numbed the senses. She came home to the usual silence, dropped her keys into the bowl like always, and wandered into the kitchen where I was sitting with my laptop open. She paused when she saw it. You're home early, she said. I nodded once. Wanted to have a conversation. She tilted her head, reading the tone before the words. About what? I turned the screen toward her. The messages were already queued up. Her text to Eric, the hotel confirmation, the selfie she'd sent from the lobby with the caption. Made it. Can't wait. All neatly organized. No rage. No trap. She stared. Didn't move. You didn't even lock the album, I said quietly. It synced automatically. Her hand came up slowly, fingers touching her temple. You went through my phone? I went through mine, I said evenly. It was all there. Synced. Backed up. Easy. She sat down across from me slowly, like all the energy had drained from her. I didn't. She started then stopped. I didn't mean for it to become anything. I believe you, I said, and I did. You didn't plan this. You just kept taking more space than you were willing to earn. She swallowed hard. We were falling apart. You were so passive? I offered. Her face crumbled a bit. I read the messages, I said. I saw the story you've been telling. The one where I vanished and you had no choice but to reach for something else. I was confused, she said. I felt like you weren't there anymore, like I was alone in this. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. That's because I stopped trying to prove my worth to someone who called loyalty an expectation. She looked down, wiped at her eye. I didn't touch him, she said quietly. Not physically. I nodded. But you let him inside our life, into the parts of you that used to be ours. That's not confusion. That's permission. She started crying, really crying now, hands trembling. I thought we could fix it. You never asked how, I said. You only kept taking, then called it normal when I gave less. Her voice broke. So what now? I stood calm, steady. Now? Nothing. I'm not angry. I'm just done. She stared up at me like that sentence had winded her, like the ground beneath her had suddenly shifted. I gave less, I said again, more quietly this time. Exactly what you asked for. Then I turned, left her sitting there, surrounded by the truths she had crafted, and now couldn't dismantle. There was no screaming, no demands, just the brutal clarity of consequences arriving quietly, without drama, and that silence said more than fury ever could. The next morning, she was already up, moving around the kitchen like it was a stage, and she didn't know her lines anymore. Coffee brewed untouched, plates clinked, cabinets opened and closed in nervous rhythm. I stepped in, grabbed a glass of water, said nothing. She looked at me like I'd forgotten something critical. Are we not going to talk about last night? I didn't answer right away. I just drank slowly, then met her eyes. There's nothing left to talk about. Her expression cracked. You can't just shut it down like this. I'm not shutting it down, I said quietly. I'm ending what's already been hollow for months. She took a step forward. Let's try. Please. I'll block him. I'll show you everything. We can reset. But there was nothing to reset. The house wasn't just cracked, it was empty. She was running through memories like a fire drill, looking for exits after the damage was already done. She started calling my family again, offering to host dinner, asking how my sister was doing, reaching out to people she'd ignored for nearly a year. It was all sudden, forced, desperate, and everyone noticed. "She okay?" my mother asked over the phone, her voice skeptical. "Too late for that question," I'd replied. She tried planning a weekend trip, sent me links to cabins we used to talk about visiting. I didn't respond. The silence hit her harder than any argument would have. I watched her spiral with surgical detachment. She started overcompensating, leaving notes, cooking, initiating conversations that hadn't existed in months. All of it built on panic, not affection. It wasn't love returning. It was control slipping. Then one night, I came home and she was waiting by the front door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I told him it's over," she said. "Completely. I want this. Us." I nodded once. "I know. You don't believe me?" "I believe you," I said calmly. "I also believe it doesn't change anything." Her voice cracked. "So that's it?" "No," I said. "That was it. This is just the part where the echo fades away." She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was. And maybe she didn't. Because the man who would have forgiven her, who would have bent and patched and carried the blame just to keep the peace, he wasn't here anymore. Her tone turned sharp, trying one last thing. "What about the life we built?" I looked around the house we used to call ours. "You mean the one you were bored of until it threatened to leave?" She had no reply. Because she knew. Eric disappeared fast once reality hit. Whatever fantasy she'd clung to dissolved when it came time to choose something real. He faded like a man who never planned to stay. She lost both of us. And I wasn't even angry, just free. I filed for separation that Friday. No drama, no announcement. Just papers on the table with my signature and a quiet, unflinching note, review and sign. "I'll send it in Monday." She didn't speak for a full minute. Just stared at the envelope like it might catch fire if she moved too fast. "You're really doing this?" she whispered. I nodded once. "I already did. The house, the one she used to brag about, corner lot, open kitchen, walk-in closet, stayed in my name. We'd bought it under my credit when her finances were still recovering from old debts. I'd paid most of the mortgage. I had documentation ready. She hadn't thought to prepare. She thought silence meant surrender. It didn't. It meant planning. She tried to argue, but even her tone was weak. "We built this together." I met her eyes. "You built a version of it you thought you could walk away from." The shared accounts were already shut down. Passwords changed. Her name off the utilities. I wasn't cruel. I gave her fair notice, enough to set up her own. But I didn't offer help. Not anymore. She called mutual friends. Some of them reached out cautiously, asking what happened. I didn't give them the dirty version. I just said, "We grew apart." Let her explain herself. Let her squirm to hide the truths she used to speak so confidently at dinner tables. Word must have spread. Because soon, the invitations stopped coming. The social media posts dried up. Even her closest friend, one who had laughed loudest at that dinner, texted me. "I had no idea. You didn't deserve that." I didn't reply. That wasn't the point. The point was this: she mocked the idea of giving, loyalty, gratitude, consistency. She framed it as expectation, as burden. But when she realized what it was like to live without it, she panicked. She tried reassembling what she broke, through force, through charm, through guilt. But I'd given too much for too long. And now I was giving exactly what she asked for. Less. I watched her struggle to adapt, to a silence that wasn't punishment, but release. To a world where her choices weren't met with forgiveness, but with absence. And she knew it. She knew, finally, that the man she used to rely on, the one who held up her storms, who caught the weight when she fell apart, was gone. Not bitter, not vengeful, just gone. The apartment was smaller, quieter. No echo of footsteps from upstairs, no second toothbrush by the sink. Just me, a couch, and the stillness that finally meant something. Not loneliness, peace. At first, the silence was jarring. I kept expecting the sound of her keys in the door, her voice calling out from the hallway, some trace of her rhythm in my new space. But it never came. And slowly, I stopped noticing. She sent a message 2 weeks after the papers were finalized. Simple. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. Not out of anger, just clarity. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of conclusion. Because what was left to say,